Okay, guys, sorry about running long on that last session, but we've got just one more thing that we want to fill out. So when we run our app, so I put in a name here and I click add, we notice that we get the right icon, but this second field is supposed to be what the animal says. So it's supposed to be meow or roar or roof for a dog. And so we want to implement that. So let's look at how we could do that. So if we come into the code here, we notice that there's no operations on any of these classes that actually do that. So let's add them. So you might naturally think, well, dog, let's say that there's a function says, and it's going to return a string, and a dog is going to say woof. And we could do the same thing for cat. So we'll copy this and we'll give it the same function name, and a cat says meow. And then finally for lion, which is going to roar, we can grab that and we can put says in here and we can say roar. Now, interestingly, when we do this, we are told that an overriding declaration requires an override keyword here. What does that mean? Well, we know that lion inherits from cat, and cat implements the says function. So this function says returns a string, and what we did is we declared an identical function, says, that returns a string, and it wants us to know that, by the way, this function is going to override this function, and this function is not going to run if you do this. And that's okay. That's what we want. So we're going to let it put the override in. And so now we have the override function in on the front, and we are good to go from that standpoint. So now we have the says function. But down here, what we want to do is, if it's a cat, we want to go ahead and use the says function. So we could say cell.detailed_text_label.text equals, and then we're going to say animal dot, but hey, we don't get says. And the reason for that is, even though we're in the cat flow, and cat does have a says function, the compiler before runtime, the compiler right now, all it knows is that animal is of an array of animals, came out of this array of animals, and it is of animal. And if I go to animal, animal does not have a says function. So at compile time, we would have to, we don't know. So it's saying, I don't know what this is. Now at runtime, animal is a cat, so this, we know it's a cat, so if it would let us call the says function, it would work. So the way we have to do this is we have to cast it to a cat, and we can do that by saying as cat. Then we could put this whole thing in parentheses, and now if I say dot, see, I get a says function. So voila, we now have an animal that has been coerced into a cat, and we know that it's okay because we already checked to see if it was a cat, and now this should work. So for cat, when I run it, we add a cat in here, and we say add, we are going to get meow. So that worked. Now, the problem I have with this is that to do this for the others, and we could have many more, we have to keep casting this thing as a cat or a dog or a lion and then call the says function. What I'd really like to do is be able to do this. I would like to, outside of the switch statement right here before it, say this equals animal.says and let it do the right thing at runtime. I want it to call the right says function depending on what the animal is, all automagically, all on its own. So here's how we can do that. We can take this out, and we're going to go up here and we're going to take this function right here, take any of them, and we're going to actually put it in the animal class. So we're going to say that anybody that inherits from animal is going to have a says function. Now, we don't know what an animal would say because we don't know what kind of animal it is. So this is going to return blank. This in other languages would be referred to as an abstract method or function, which means that it needs to be overridden by whoever is inheriting from it to really make it work right. So that means that dog is overriding says with its own says, and we're going to let it put the override keyword in now. And over here for cat, same thing. We're going to put that in and say fix. And now we have dog and cat and lion all inheriting down the chain, and the animal itself is going to support says. So if I come back here to this code, notice we don't have an error anymore. So I'm compiling build succeeds. So this is saying that I'm going to call the says function. You would think, oh, it's going to call because it's an animal, it's going to call this. Well, it's not. If it's a dog, it'll automatically call this overridden function, or if it's a cat or a lion. So let's try it. So I'm going to run this. So now if I say Tiffany for cat and hit add, I get meow. That's good. Now if I go to dog and I do Fido and I click add, I get woof. And if I do Brutus and I say lion and I add, I get roar. And it all did the right thing based on this single line of code right here. It's actually dynamically picking the right class because the compiler is letting us do that because we put the says function in at the top of the hierarchy so that it knew that this was legal and okay to do. So that's it. So that's overriding functions.